Jeff and Allison, and farmers likely. But most of all, Father, again, help us to carry our cross daily, that we might be effective as Christians to serve in your kingdom. Through Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, this is, I'm not doing the Revelations class. I'm not continuing on with that just because I wasn't told to, and I was never given a lesson, so. The class tonight, I'm focusing on a couple things that have been on my mind recently. So a few weeks ago, I don't know who brought it up, but it was in class, we mentioned, like listening to the Bible when you're going throughout your day, audiobooks, things like that. So I've started doing that again in the past few weeks, trying to get better at it. And as I've been doing it, what I like about reading the Bible or listening to the Bible is every time, even if you've read the whole thing cover to cover, you can always find something new. You know, and you say, I don't think I've ever read that verse before. I know I have, but I've never noticed it. Or just different themes pop out to you and keep repeating. And what's been hitting me recently is just how concerned God was and is with being able to make everything accessible to us and making things relate to us and helping us to connect with Him. Because He really wanted to make sure that we were able to understand everything and that we could find Him when we were looking for Him. One of the biggest things that hit me was the parable of the lost son. You know, too often we think about God is up in heaven, way, way off, far away. We can't get to Him, and that we'll never be good enough to get to Him. Even if we become a Christian, we think that to have a relationship with Him, we've got to be like perfect before we can commune with God. And somebody wants to read Luke 15, 11 through 20 for me, I'd appreciate it. Because it really shows what God's thinking and feeling when we're lost and when we're coming back to Him. Somebody want to read that for me? Oh, Karen?
Jesus continued, there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs would eat, but no one gave him anything. Then he came to his senses. He said, How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.
That's good there. Thank you.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and maybe it's just me, but I always have this feeling that if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do and my relationship with God isn't what it should be, I'm always worried that when I ask for forgiveness, God will say, well, okay, but make yourself better, stop completely everything you've done, never do that again, become a perfect person, and then you can come back. But this story, this is us and God, that parable, you know, and that's not what the father in the story did. Just like the father in the story, you know, God knows when we're not where we're supposed to be. He knows when we're lost. He knows when we're outside of the bounds of salvation. And the father in the story, he didn't follow his son. You know, just like God can't leave where He's at to follow us around all the time, dragging us back, forcing us to stay safe, forcing us to be with Him. But He waits for us. You know, I always imagine that there's a line. On one side of it, you're not saved. On one inside of it, you're saved. And when I read this story, I picture God sort of getting his toes right up to the line. He's right there. As soon as we cross over, he's ready for us. You know, he's watching for us. He knows when we're thinking about him. And he's ready to grab us as soon as we come back. He doesn't make us come back and then earn his forgiveness. As soon as we ask for forgiveness, we're back. And he's grabbing onto us. Obviously, we've got to make changes once we ask for forgiveness, but he's ready for us. And sort of within that same thought of God wanting to connect with us, wanting to make things understandable, wanting us to have a relationship with him, I sort of noticed this popping up again and again as I was listening through the New Testament, listening to a lot of the parables that Jesus used. Even from, like, as soon as he starts getting followers and getting disciples, he wants them to understand. Some of the first ones, in Matthew chapter 4, and there's nothing on the screen because I'm no good at those, just so you're not waiting for something to pop up there.
Matthew 4.
Yeah, Matthew 4, starting in verse 18, that's when he starts getting some new disciples to follow him. You know, the first ones, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. What did they do for a living before Jesus found them? Fishermen, yeah. And so the first thing he says to, let's see, Peter and Andrew, the first ones, yeah. He said, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. He doesn't go up to them and say, you know, you're going to be my disciples. I'm going to teach you. Here's all my truths, and here's what I'm going to teach you. Here's what I want you to learn. No, he says, you know about fishers, or being fishers. You know about fishing. It's pretty similar what we're doing. You're just going to fish for men. You know, he started somewhere that they understood and went from there. Then he goes and grabs James and John. And then Matthew 13, as I was listening and just hearing some of the parables, I was trying to figure out who Jesus was talking to with the different parables. In Matthew 13, I think he was talking to Peter, Andrew, James, and John, the people in that area that knew about fishing. This is the one about the nets, starting in verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which when it was full they drew to shore, and they sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age, the angels will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, and cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to them, have you understood all these things? They said to him, yes, Lord. So again, he's taken something that they know, something that they understand, something that they've done, and is relating it to his real message. Obviously, he's not there to teach people how fishing works, but he's got to start them somewhere. Same with when he's Matthew. You know, Matthew was a tax collector. I was trying to research what all the different disciples did back before they became disciples. We don't know a lot of them. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they fished. Matthew was a tax collector. That's about it for the original ones. You know, I found a lot of different...
James was the zealot,
yeah.
so he was political.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people think Judas was also maybe a tax collector, but, you know, people come up with all sorts of theories when there's no good answer. But Matthew, you know, he was a tax collector. So when I read Luke chapter 12, I think that's probably maybe to Matthew and maybe to some of the people like him. In verse 16 it says, and he told them this parable, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. So this one, I think Jesus was kind of hitting a twofer. You know, he was looking at people who knew about farming. They knew about storing up for the future. But he was also focused on the people who had spent a lot of their life worried about the monetary things, worrying about what they had in the bank, what they had in their pockets, and trying to teach them, look, none of that matters. You know, you've started your life focused on these things, but it's not important.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
it's kind of like on-the-job training.
Mm-hmm.
They come from different backgrounds, but he's got a different plan.
Right.
You know, not to negate the physical needs, but there's something even more important that he's training them for.
Mm-hmm.
Because he doesn't just say, okay, here you are, go. I mean, he's with them for several years.
Well, what was, I don't remember where it was, but when they were trying to cast out a demon, and then Jesus came and he did it, and they said, well, why couldn't we do it? So yeah, it's not like he miraculously taught them everything they needed to know and then sent them out. No, it sounds like he sent them out and they did their best, and maybe they'd come back and he'd teach them some more or train them some more. So yeah, it's they were learning as they go, learning on the job. Now,
You know, when you look at this about the prodigal son, I think many of us fall into the category of the older brother. We look at somebody else and say, they keep making the same mistakes, they make them over and over and over again, and look what they've done. They don't deserve this.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that we all need to be careful of, because in reality, none of us deserve this.
right. And that's part of my end thing is sort of along that point, is that we've got to remember that we're just like everybody else. Just because we've found God doesn't mean we're better than somebody who hasn't yet. It just means they haven't found him yet. Luke, in Luke 5, Luke was a physician. He's a doctor. He wasn't one of the original 12, but I find it interesting. So the book of Luke, that's not things that he saw himself. You know, he's researched this. He's brought all these together. And Luke chapter 5,
Did you say 5?
yes.
Okay.
Somebody want to read verses 27 through 32?
And after he went out and noticed a tax gatherer named Levi sitting in the tax office, and he said to him, follow me. And he left everything behind and rose up and began to follow him. And Levi gave a big reception for him in his house. There was a great crowd of tax gatherers and other people who were reclining at table with them. And the Pharisees and their scribes began grumbling at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with the tax gatherers and sinners? And Jesus answered and said to them, it is not those who are well who need a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call righteous men, but sinners to repentance.
And so Luke, when he was putting his letter together, turned into the book of Luke, I think there's a reason he included this particular story. You know, I bet this one sort of was a light bulb moment for him. You know, he was a doctor, so he knew, well, all that time that I was a doctor, I wasn't concerned about the people that were healthy. That wasn't what I really did. I was worried about the sick people and healing them. I've never been a big doctor person. I go to the dentist. That's about it. And every time I go to the dentist, they say, who's your doctor? And I say, I don't know. I don't really have one. Well, when's the last time you saw a doctor? I went to the ER a couple years ago once, and that's about it. My thing is, if I'm feeling okay, I don't want the doctor to tell me any different. And so I'm just not going to go. So if I go to the doctor and get a checkup, and I say, I feel fine, and they say, yep, you're doing okay, I'll say, okay, thanks. Some of you may have, maybe you've had a serious surgery or something where you were not well at all and the doctor fixed it. You're probably a lot more grateful to your doctor than I am to mine that I see once every 10 years. Because they haven't done much for me. But for somebody else who really needed them, they say, thank you, saved my life. I love that doctor. Thank you so much. And it's the same way here. Jesus didn't spend all his time around the people who didn't need him and wouldn't appreciate him and that wouldn't let him, teach and everything. He was around the people that needed him and that wanted him to be there. Is that traffic or is it just raining real hard again? Nice. My gutters fell off the back of my house a few weeks ago. It's good timing. And the company hasn't come to put new ones on. So.
Is that two-story or one-story?
Some of both. Well, the the second story gutters fell off.
Oh.
The lower ones are okay, but it's a mess. Speaking of parables, another one that always jumps out at me is the Samaritan woman at the well. We've talked about it in classes here before. She was at the well in the middle of the day. It was hot. It was uncomfortable. She was there by herself. Why does that make a difference that she was there in the middle of the day all by herself? Why is he telling us that information? Libby.
Well, Samaritans weren't very well liked by other nationalities.
Mm-hmm.
They were considered to be not very friendly or religious. And because they worshiped a pagan god, they were kind of, get out of here, you don't belong here.
Yeah, the Jews and the Samaritans didn't usually interact much, but it sounds like probably wasn't well liked by the other Samaritan women. They normally would have all gone in the morning or something when it wasn't so hot. So she's already a bit of an outcast, and then even more of an outcast among her own people. So Jesus tells her. Let's see, John 4, verse 13, Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." So, water, number one, back then and in that area was a big thing in everybody's life, but especially hers. She had to go out, work hard in the heat, all by herself, and every time she went, that was probably just a reminder of what her life was. She was an outcast. Nobody wanted to be with her. Nobody wanted to be around her. They didn't want to talk to her. And every time she went to that well, all by herself, that was just another reminder of it. So water to her, and having to go there to draw water, that was probably one of the biggest things weighing on her mind all the time. And so that's where Jesus found her. That's how he related to her. Obviously, it wasn't about actual water, but he used that as a tool to open her mind to what he had to say.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And that's a good lesson for us, I think, when we're interfacing with people, is understanding where they're at, where they're coming from.
All right.
Just comment.
Oh, yeah. Another one I thought in John chapter 5, verse 4, was the invalid man by the pool. They laid down by the pool, and every so often an angel would come down and stir up the waters, and if you could get in there quick enough, you could be healed. And then, let's see, John 5:5, it says, "Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be made well?'" So again, he's finding a person, looking at what's the biggest thing in their life. What can I use to connect to them and to bring them towards his message? Verse 7, the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me." And Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." So another one, he found the thing that was causing issues in this person's life and used that to connect with them. I don't know, I see a certain message in that. What about you guys? I'll open the floor. What do you think that man learned from being healed by Jesus in that way? Or the people that saw it and heard about it?
He's dependent on others for his livelihood, for his food, and somebody carried him to the pool every day, and he needed him and picked him up.
Mhm.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it took at least
months of therapy.
Mhm.
When Jesus heals, it's 100%. You know, as we look around, we still have modern day faith healers, but they claim you have to have faith. And there are some places in the Bible in Acts where the person that was healed really didn't have any faith.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in these verses that says this man knew who Jesus was or was really asking him to be healed. It sounds like Jesus said, hey, what's going on? And the guy's just telling him his life story.
And then he says, do you want to be healed?
Yeah.
Well, the thing that you look at is this man didn't have any hope for meeting the requirements. He could tell him why he wasn't able to do that, but he didn't have any hope of achieving.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing that sort of stuck out to me. That was my main takeaway is that this man didn't have anybody to get him down in there, but really he didn't need anybody. He needed Jesus.
As far as the crowds watching, they would have known that it wasn't just some kind of a con or,
Mhm.
you know, some kind of a setup, because this man has been like that for 38 years. You have to assume that he was part of this group, these people that have known him, and they knew that he was actually injured,
Mhm.
you know, couldn't walk or do anything like that.
Yeah.
So they had to take that into account.
Yeah, it's sort of like what you said about the faith healers on TV. I got no idea who those people are that they're healing, or if they're even unwell to begin with. I've seen aliens on TV. It's not real, but you know, I've got no idea if this guy says you're healed. I don't know that, but yeah, they knew that guy. He was there for years and years, and all of a sudden he gets up and walks.
And that's amazing because his muscles would be atrophied.
Mhm.
You know, I've just been, I went a year before I had my surgery, and I've got atrophied muscles. I was, you know, 10 to 12 months, and I'm a mess,
Mhm.
trying to wake those muscles up.
Yeah.
Better.
Yeah, 100%. As soon as he said he was healed, he got up and walked. That was it.
It says that the man who was healed had no idea who it was that healed him.
Oh, yeah.
It says Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there.
Mhm.
And it was complete. That's the other thing. Jesus doesn't go just halfway. It's complete.
Right. Yeah. So we look at this. Jesus has talked to, you know, the Samaritan woman, this man that had whatever his physical issue was by the pool. We look at stories. You know, he heals a family member of the Roman centurion. He talks to the Canaanite woman in Matthew. He has dinner with tax collectors. He adulterers and adulteresses, the rich young ruler that he talked to, you know, the poor, the outcasts. He talks to everybody. Yeah, Mike.
Say another one was in Acts chapter 3 with the man who was lame from birth. That's a similar one.
Mm-hmm.
Peter and John healed him. Jesus healed him.
And what Mike brought up is really interesting because I think the guy there was looking for some financial handout.
Yeah.
In Acts chapter 3, he said, we don't have gold and silver, but what we do have is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Get up and walk.
Yeah, again, starting where, you know, this guy, all he wants is money, because he doesn't know to ask for more. Obviously, nobody's going to come by and just heal me, but at least I can get some money. So they start where he's at and go from there. So one of the things that's been striking me as I was reading all these stories about all the different people that Jesus interacted with was that he never said, here's who I am, here's my message, go away, fix yourself, make your life right, then come talk to me about what you can do. You know, what does he say to all the men are gathered around getting ready to stone the woman. He says, you know, you who are without sin, cast the first stone. And they leave, and what does he say to her? He says, go and sin no more. He was worried about, you know, he can forgive the stuff in the past. But what he needs us to do is change how we're living going forward, change the things that we're doing. And that was in John chapter 8. So one of the things that I thought about actually just today while I was sort of going over this is, you know, we have this example from God and Jesus of accepting people back, being ready to bring them to God. Islam has an interesting idea that I've heard a few people use. When a non-Muslim, what we would say they, you know, convert to Islam, they become a Muslim and start living in that, they don't say that the person's converting to Islam. They call it reverting. Because what they say is when you're born, you have that faith, you have that relationship with God. And so no matter what you do as you grow, whether you're a Christian or a Jew or no religion at all, when you come to Islam, you're reverting back to where you're supposed to be. And I think that's an interesting idea because it makes sense. You know, we're supposed to be in a relationship with God. We're supposed to be, to have that salvation. That's what he wants for us. I just think that they have an interesting way of looking at it. Is you're not becoming something new. You're coming back to where you were supposed to be all along. So just like God, or just like that father and the prodigal son, we need to be standing there anxiously waiting for people to come back. You know, even if they have an ugly past, even if they have things that they're going to struggle with, you know, we need to be ready. A lot of times, maybe it's just me, maybe some of you also deal with this, but I feel like we overcomplicate salvation. All right, what are the steps of salvation? Just throw them out there. Anybody?
Hear, believe,
Yep.
repent, confess, baptism.
Yep.
Unto
Yeah. How much do you have to hear? I mean, there's a lot of examples in the Bible that people didn't study years, months, weeks. They didn't hear much. All they heard was the basics.
We see the Ethiopian eunuch in one little ride from so far to so far, he heard enough.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to hear all of it. You have to hear enough to believe. And how much do you have to believe? That God is God, that Jesus is His Son? Yes, sir.
Fact is, what confuses a lot of people is if they try to learn too much, and then they don't know what to hang their hat on. Because, you know, it creates the confusion syndrome, as opposed to somebody who comes up, tells them the truth, and they obey that, and then they can build on that. But if you try to give them everything ahead of time, you know, and that makes it tough, really.
Yeah, we're never going to learn all of is Earl. It was a show 15, 20 years ago, I don't know. But he, from what I remember, he was kind of a bad guy. You know, he had done a lot of bad things in his past, and he, for some reason, wanted to make up for him. So he had a list of all these people that he had wronged. And the premise of the show was, you know, him finding these people and trying to fix things. You know, God doesn't expect us to track down everybody we've ever wronged and make things right, and then we can be saved. No, he says, ask for forgiveness, and you can be saved. Now, you'll have to change the way you're living. You might need to go back and try and fix some things, you know. You might need to find somebody and say, you know what, the way I was before, I did wrong by you, and I'm sorry. You know, you might need to try and fix some relationships. You might need to, you know, do something like that, but that's not a prerequisite, is to fix everything you've ever done. Just like, again, back to the prodigal son, the father wasn't standing there with a bill, you know, to give the son, say, hey, pay me back, and then you can come back. No, that was behind it. The son came back asking for forgiveness, so the father forgave him. And then, ultimately, you know, God knew that to connect with us, what was his ultimate form of connecting with us is who we are. I would say it was sending his son down to become like us. Hebrews chapter 2, 14 through 18. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. I mean, that just shows the lengths that God and Christ were willing to go to make sure they could connect with us, so that they could meet us where we were, was to actually come down to where we were, become just like us, so that he could understand and help us.
That verse 16, I've got it highlighted. You know, people always, some people even worship angels. But it says, for surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. You know, we have a way back to God. Angels, if they've fallen, they don't have a way back.
Right.
And that's pretty profound. You know, here they were in heaven. If they fell with Satan, they have no way to get back there. What a interesting idea. It says we're more than the angels, but we're really more superior because we have a Father that will take us back.
Yeah, he knew, I don't know exactly how the angels work, but apparently, you know, it's not as hard for them. They can go through eternity still being right with God. They can be perfect in whatever they do. Obviously, they're able to fall, but God knew when he made us, like, we got no chance. We're not making it through a whole life being a perfect person without sin. And so we needed that. And then also, one that, like I said at the beginning, this is one of those that hit me when I went over it. It never really jumped out at me before, but John chapter 10, verses 14 through 18. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And starting in verse 16, that's the one that I never really thought about. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. So, who are the sheep that are not of this sheep pen that also have to be brought back?
Gentiles.
Yeah, so it was, you know, the Jews, he gave them a path. He knew it wasn't perfect, but he came down knowing that all of us, everyone on the planet, he wanted us. You know, he said, yeah, originally we had this group, but that's not enough. Everyone is supposed to be in a relationship with God. Everyone, he wants to be saved. And so that's part of our job. Like Hal said, just the way that God and Jesus took such huge steps, you know, becoming human, coming down to earth, giving up his life, just to meet us where we are. We have to do the same thing for others. You know, we have to realize we're no different from anybody else. We need to accept people. Obviously, we've got to teach them, but we need to be able to accept them for who they are, right where they are, and teach them from there. Yeah.
You know, in Hebrews chapter 2, we see as it talks about Christ, and it says, he is not ashamed to call them brothers. Now, no matter what you've done, Christ is not ashamed to say that you're his brother. That's very important for all of us, because all of us have failed at some point.
Yeah, so if Christ is not ashamed of anyone, I mean, has anyone else in here ever met a person, seen a person, and you know, you caught yourself maybe not making eye contact with them, you didn't want to be near them, you tried to move away? I mean, I've done it. I shouldn't, but I have. But if Jesus, the Son of God, says, yep, that's one of my sheep, that's my brother, if he's willing to claim anyone, who are we to turn him away? Who are we to avoid him and not try to teach him? That's most of my lesson, but I deal with a lot of people at work, and a lot of people that aren't living good lives. And what I find interesting is that a lot of people know that they're not living good lives. There's a couple people that I deal with often that are dealing with heavy addiction issues between drugs and alcohol and homelessness, and they have a lot of issues, and most of them realize how a lot of people feel about them when they come across them in town. You know, they know that people try and avoid them. They know that people don't really want to talk to them, and they move away from them. And it's amazing how just some kindness makes a difference. You know, there's a few of them that I talk to that I check on every once in a while, and it's easy to have a conversation with them because just like anyone else, people want to have a connection with someone. People want to talk to people. People want to just say hi to somebody. We as Christians, we have to make sure that we're doing that. We cannot let money, where you're from, the way that you live, you know, anything. We can't let these things separate us and divide us, and keep us from people. We are called by God to meet people where they are. Again, once we meet them there, we need to teach them. We can't stay there with them. We need to bring them to God and be that example. That was the second bell. I appreciate the comments and everything.